Let's talk about this a little more with somebody who knows the Gators very, very well. Nick Torre of Gators Online. How are we doing, Nick?
Awesome. Just great, Andy.
It's always positive news when have I ever had you on for anything positive? Because like I know when Florida beat Tennessee last year, you were busy. So Zach Alverdi, your partner at Gators Online, I had him on. I feel like you're the dark cloud.
Yeah, you had me on after Kentucky. I remember doing that one from the Airbnb in Lexington. No, I think I'm just the Grim Reaper for Florida when it comes to the Andy Staples show.
Well, listen, it's not personal. It's really more just kind of percentages. Like the news for the Gators has not been particularly great over the last 11 months since I joined the company. But let's talk about this Rashada case, because you and I knew that this was cooking in the background. We didn't know if it was ever going to get filed. Were you surprised that it did finally come out, that it dropped, and that Billy Napier gets named?
Yeah, I think the new conspiracy theory, which is fun, that Kirby Smart took Jaden Rashada just to be able to have this lawsuit come out against Florida. While very fun and very college football, I think we both know that this lawsuit had been in the works, thought of, constructed from before when Jaden even went to Arizona State. So this has been a long time coming. And personally, I didn't think that we would get to this point. I think when you look at some of the things in the lawsuit, previously saying that you were going to accept any sort of money to go to a school would be an inducement, and you would lose your eligibility. And we've seen the landscape of the NCAA change over the last 10, 11 months, where that's not even a thing. Florida was being investigated for this by the NCAA, who was too busy with a water pistol putting out their own fires in the Congress and in courts, that they said, listen, we're putting a pause on all of this. So I think that's probably the reason why we're seeing a lawsuit now. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Listening to you and Pete talking, I don't know that many of these cases get to even discovery, let alone a bench or jury trial. Typically,
my theory is still that the specific reason he includes, now Hugh Hathcock is the Gators donor, but the company that Hugh Hathcock ran, that he has since sold, like the fact that company's in there, that feels like, to me, okay, you're who I want to write the check.
It could be, listen, well, this is the company that funds were going to come from. So we'll include you. It could be, well, that company's now changed hands. I think right now, as an attorney, you're looking, what pockets can we collect from? We feel like we're owed money. Where can we collect from? And if you're looking for something in the $10 million range, Billy Napier makes a lot of money. He's personally not writing a $10 million check. Who can? Hugh Hathcock reportedly has that kind of money that he can write a check. Certainly the company, which reportedly or allegedly some of the money was going to be coming from, can write that kind of check. And maybe the person or the entity that bought that company doesn't want to deal with this headache and would rather write a check, stroke a check to have it go away, to not put a dark cloud over their investment, because this has certainly been a dark cloud over Florida for, it feels like a decade now, but I think it's about 13 months.
From Roback, I am wearing the Performance Polo right now, also wearing the joggers right now. Hoodies, polos, joggers, shorts, you name it, Roback makes the most comfortable clothing in the universe. Those performance hoodies, if you buy one, you may as well buy two, because if there's somebody else in your house, it's getting stolen. Go to roback.com, RHOBACK.com. Use the code Andy for 20% off your first order. That's code Andy, 20% off your first order at Roback. Well, that's the part that, this is just the thing that keeps coming up, that keeps biting them in the butt again. And I don't I don't know about you. The more I read, I was reading through all that yesterday, going back to doing, all the stuff on it when it was happening, it felt to me, especially reading some of those text messages, that this was more of a Hugh Hathcock versus John Ruiz. So Hugh Hathcock, the Florida donor, John Ruiz, the Miami donor, who chimed in yesterday as well. Like it. Let me ask you this: if he's not committed to Miami, if Ruiz isn't the person, because Ruiz is not as involved in NIL with Miami anymore, but like if he's not committed to Miami and Ruiz isn't that person handling the situation, like if he was going to Ole Miss or to LSU or anywhere else, do you think Florida does this with this massive bidding war to try to get him?
You have to go back and look at just how almost vindictive John Ruiz was and flying in the face of the NCAA. I think one of the basketball players committed, and in his commitment tweet was thanks to Life Wallet. And it's like, I think you have to be like on campus. This seems like an inducement, but the NCAA wasn't really enforcing anything. And
that's when Ruiz was tweeting out what the pay scale was.
Yeah. Congratulations on his $800,000 2-year contract and his new car. And you're like, wait, what? Yeah. Florida was losing so many recruits in a high-profile way, and I think that one summer was so unprecedented in just how public these boosters were being inside, mainly just Ruiz, but was being in regards to recruiting. This is nothing new. Boosters being involved in football recruiting is nothing new. We can ask our friends at our SMU site that it's been going on for a while, just not publicly. It was all under the table. And now kind of in the wild, wild west of NIL, it became very public. And to me, it seemed like one billionaire to another, hey, I'm tired of losing. Let's win at all costs. What will it cost? We need a win here.
Yep.
Because we haven't gotten one in a while.
Yeah, and the lawsuit claims that Rashada had a $9.5 million deal with Miami. Ruiz, when I was working at The Athletic and we did the big story on it last year, Ruiz said it wasn't $9.5 million. He said again yesterday it was not $9.5 million. I'm not sure they were competing against a $9.5 million contract. I think they may have thought they were, but
maybe it was 6. Maybe it was 9.49. Andy, 9.49 is not 9.5.
It is not, but it's like if Discovery were to come out in that, because it is a fraud case. It's not breach of contract. It's fraud. And so I would love to see if there's a document that he signed with Life Wallet. Like that would be very educational if we could find this out. And I realize like none of this affects the Billy Napier part of it, because again, the Billy Napier part of it is him claiming, or it's actually Jaden Rashada's father, Harlan, claiming that Napier told them that they were going to wire them $1 million after Rashada signed, and that money never came. There's no text message attached to that, nothing. So it is basically one person's account of a conversation, and then we have not heard from the other person. And I think it's important that the other person get a chance to say what their side of that was.
Yeah, filing a lawsuit is not, you have no burden of proof to file a lawsuit. Everything we read in the 37-page document is just an accusation from one party. And the burden of proof falls on the plaintiff if it were to go to trial. Billy Napier and his attorney could sit there if it were to go to trial and not say a word. It's completely on the plaintiff, the person bringing the suit, to prove their claims. And at this stage, when you file a lawsuit, you don't have to. Now, talking to a couple of lawyers on Tuesday, reading through it, they said, I think a judge would allow this to continue on. But then that's when the burden shifts and the plaintiff has to start providing evidence. That's what discovery is for. Having dealt with Florida for a decade, this does not seem like a case that they want to go to discovery. It's a $1 billion entity that runs like a Fortune 500 company. Fortune 500 companies don't like this kind of headline and typically stroke checks to make it go away. It's clear that Jaden Rashada feels like he was promised money and is owed money. I've been watching the Denzel Washington clip. I forget what interview it was, but he says, I'm going to leave here with something. I'm from around the way. I'm leaving here with something. And I get that. If someone promised me far less than Jaden and I felt like it was owed to me, I'm leaving here with something. So I get what Jaden Rashada is trying to do. I see a lot of people calling it a money grab, but if somebody promised me $13.85 million, I'm not going away quietly.
Yeah, we published that contract. Like, it was incredibly stupid of them to offer him
Yeah.
that contract, but they still did, and he still signed it. So he thought something was coming.
It's
And
interesting
he got
that
nothing.
it's interesting that the only entity, which is now the defunct Gator Collective, the only entity
Right.
that was ever in a legal binding contract with Jaden Rashada is not mentioned, which would tell me that contract was legally voided based on the
Well, and
terms that were inside of
the
it.
Gator Collective no longer exists. So you could sue the people, but you can't sue the entity because the entity doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, that it is a very strange situation. And yes, the other part that's interesting about the contract itself, and if you want to read the contract, we published it at On3 on Tuesday. You can read the whole $13.85 million contract, which you can then pair with the 37-page PDF of the complaint if you really want to get into some dry legalese. But the contract requires arbitration to settle any disputes. Arbitration happens privately.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing Rusty Hardin and Jaden Rashada wanted this to happen very publicly. Mm-hmm. And so that is why they are not making any claims against the contract itself.
Yeah. Again, when you're in a civil case, the goal is to collect money. You're not changing the world. You're not solving hunger or peace. You're trying to collect on a perceived debt. And publicly going against a company that was sold, a university who is very public, and the head coach who has enough fire and enough on his plate to deal with just coaching football games. And then, a now fired former staffer. It will be interesting to see how it plays out. I kind of fully expect this to be settled out of court with some pretty ironclad non-disclosures, so that
I don't think we're ever going to see a dollar figure if the check is written.
Yeah, I don't think we'll know what the check was for. I don't see this right now costing Billy Napier his job. Florida is the one rumored or reported thing that was in the complaint is that Billy Napier promised $1 million. There's no proof to back that up right now. If it's a voice recording, Florida's a two-party consent state, as is California, where the Rashadas live, which means both parties need to know and agree to the voice, to the call being recorded. It's just a rabbit hole. Sometimes you feel like to cover college football, you should have gone to law school, but luckily I was able to get some lawyers
Nick,
on the phone.
Speaking of rabbit holes, you and I live in the same town, and what you just said, like, as reporters, you have to know what's a one-party consent state, what's a two-party consent state for recording conversations.
Yeah.
How many times have you been tempted to drive to Georgia to make a phone call?
I haven't.
Only an hour and 15 minutes.
I haven't. I've been pulled over enough times going 5 miles an hour over the speed limit in Georgia. It's not worth it.
I've had a few where I'm like, I should drive to Georgia before I make this phone call. But usually if you just ask the person, they'll say yes or no. You can record or you can't. So it's nice to just be upfront about it. But let's talk about the Gators in general, because I don't think this case is going to affect them on the field. But as fate would have it, they do open against Miami in what I'm calling the Pitchforks and Torches Bowl. Basically, each fan base believes, like, if they can't beat that team, the season's a disaster. Why bother? So whoever loses is going to melt down. Let's talk about the Gators, who I am sensing some optimism from Florida people. And I'm looking at the offensive line specifically, and I feel like Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon, the transfer tackle from San Diego State, I feel like he is kind of a key linchpin in making this offensive line better, which is something they really needed.
Yeah, Damian George struggled mightily at right tackle. I remember, I think it was at South Carolina, before Graham Mertz's post-game press conference, saying to him, like, man, you are one tough SOB, and I wish your offensive line didn't make you show it every week. He's permanent grass stains on his jersey. I wonder if they have those out of his jersey before Florida plays Miami. But I think the offensive line they feel like they're too deep pretty much at every position. You get Austin Barber back. He's healthy. Jake Slaughter, they found something in him, a guy who had kind of just been around and been a background piece. Really stepped up last year when he needed to when Kingsley Aguakin went down. So Florida feels good about the offensive line. I like the addition of Elijah Badger, obviously with Trey Wilson. The running back room, you're without Trevor Etienne, but they love Jaden Ball. Montrell Johnson is going to go over 3,000 career rushing yards this year. And then the defense was a complete overhaul. I think it's Billy Napier's best roster since he's been here. It's also the toughest schedule. And the SEC kicked the scheduling can down the street another year. So they're just running it back in 2025. So this schedule that you're looking at right now, just flip Miami to an away game, add one out-of-conference opponent, and then that's the schedule next year as well.
Yeah,
So
and UCF trades for USF, which like Alex Golish is doing a good job at USF. That's not going to be an easy game in 25 either. You mentioned the defense and the overhaul. The loss of Princely Umanmielen to Ole Miss really hurt, but tell me about Justice Boone, because he's the guy that when I ask people, that's the name that comes up the most of this is a guy you're going to be talking about in the fall. Yeah,
we were ready to talk about him last fall before he got injured in a fall scrimmage. So Justice Boone is a talented player. We haven't really seen him at his best on the field. I think we were anticipating seeing that in 2023 before the injury. But he's almost the heart and soul of Florida's defense. And even when you look at what travel rosters are in the SEC, and you can only bring a certain number of guys when you go on the road, they brought Justice Boone on crutches. That's kind of what he means to the locker room. To bring a player and to use a roster spot on the road, I think speaks a lot for just how respected Justice Boone is. But he's going to be coming off the edge for Florida. They feel really good about him. Florida's kind of deep, like 2 or 3 deep at all those positions. I always go back to what Chris Rumpf told me. He said he learned those defensive linemen have one gas tank. There's not enough whole milk and orange slices to give him in the locker room to fill that gas tank up. And I don't know that Florida has a first-team All-SEC defensive lineman, Andy, but I think the sum of the parts and being able to only play guys 25, 30 snaps and keep them fresh should play well for Florida this fall.
Well, and I think everybody understands that. Like 2 years ago, watching Gervon Dexter play all those snaps at 300 pounds, if they'd had somebody to give him a breather every once in a while, he's probably a much more effective player. I mean, and
he's
that's
not playing 68 snaps against Utah.
Exactly. And that's what one thing Florida's had to do. And then the tackling in the secondary, it seems like they did bring in some veteran guys through the portal that they hope will be able to bring some people down once they get past the second level.
Yeah, that's I remember talking to Will Harris. He had just taken the job. It was early signing day, and he said, yeah, I'm about to watch film cut-ups of my secondary on the way back to California to get my stuff to bring it back here. And I think he was offering guys on the plane. You watch those cut-ups, and Florida not only didn't tackle well, at times it looked like they had no interest in tackling in the secondary, which is an issue unless you're playing flag football. So I think what Florida did, they added a bunch of really athletic young players in Jameer Grimsley, Cormani McClain. You have a class of 5 defensive backs from the previous year who all have a ton of experience. But then you added DJ Douglas, former walk-on in Alabama, transferred to Florida from Tulane. You get Asa Turner and you get Traquez Bridges. That's a lot of starts and some good tackling veterans. So I think Florida has a good mix of young athletic talent with some older veterans through the transfer portal.
Now, you mentioned Cormani McClain, who we were just talking about Jaden Rashada, and Cormani was another member of that class of 2023 that Florida and Miami duked it out over. He kind of ended up playing both of them and then went to Colorado, and then it didn't work out at Colorado. You know, Dion was very critical of him during last season. Then he ends up leaving Colorado this offseason. So how did Cormani McClain wind up in Gainesville?
Yeah, it's kind of been back-to-back roller coasters this week, old roller coasters that we're riding with those two. I think Cormani McClain, everyone wanted him. The allure of being a defensive back like Cormani McClain and playing for, in my opinion, probably the best defensive back to ever play football, and Deion Sanders ultimately won out over Miami and over Florida. He's a kid who is very close to his mom. He's from Orlando. And I think when you get out to Colorado, they don't really have a culture. Deion's a first-time Division I head coach. They're building a culture. You get out there and there's not really direction. You're far away from home. All of a sudden, there's this like really cold white stuff falling from the sky in November. You're like, what is this?
It was falling in the spring game last year.
No, thank you. No, thank you. I think it's a culture shock. And then I think when you decide to leave that market, everyone wanted you when you were a senior in high school. When you were a junior in high school, everyone wanted you. And I think when you get into that market and all of a sudden the phone's not ringing the same way, the coaches aren't talking to you the same way, I think it's a little humbling. And he's going to walk on at Florida. Now, listen, we say that, and it is true. There will be a scholarship waiting for him in December when there's a little more roster flexibility than there is right now. But I think it's a humbling experience. In Florida, we're not talking about a kid who's getting in trouble with police or getting arrested or anything like that. Maybe just some immaturity. Florida feels like they've, in the 3 years, built a culture and a structure inside their program that, as my colleague Zach Albaverdi wrote, can probably help Cormani more than Cormani can help them. And I don't know that he'll be thrown into being a starter right away. You have Jason Marshall and Devin Moore when he's healthy, starting at cornerback. So I think Cormani is, in Florida's mind, a low-risk, high-reward play. You get a former 5-star who could be a potential draft pick down the road at little risk to you. Right.
And that's the thing. I think we have this notion that if you're a 5-star and you're not immediately impactful, well, you're a bust. You'll never, like, he's got 3 more years of eligibility. 4, and then 4 if he were to redshirt this year. So, like, there's a chance that he could still turn into a very productive college football player. That because he has the physical tools. It's just a matter of putting it all together. But I just found it so interesting that they came back around on him, because apart from Rashada, he felt like kind of emblematic of how that era of Florida recruiting went, where it was like, we're going to go after these big fish, but we're not quite sure what we're doing here. It feels like they've buttoned some of that up. Ezra in the chat talking about Rashada. He had a contract that allowed both parties to back out at any time. Dumb lawsuit, if you ask me. We didn't ask you, Ezra, but it's probably a dumb lawsuit. You're right, but that's why they sued for fraud and didn't go after anything in the contract. Briley says Florida's season and Napier's job probably both right on game 1 against Miami. Gators got to find a way to 6 wins, and hard to see much of a path without a win against, he called them the Candy Canes. Oh, boy. Oh, that's fighting words, Briley. Nick, I don't think Billy Napier's job rides on the result of the Miami game, but I do think, I don't know about you, I think if Florida's not 4-1 after the first 5, the path to 7-5 or a result that feels like you're confident going forward, I think the path is very narrow if you're not 4-1 of those first 5 games.
Yeah, I might start calling week 1 the Hope Bowl. Both coaches hired the same offseason, are under 500. They're selling hope to their fan bases. And this is a former yearly rivalry. As you can see from the comments, calling them the Candy Canes. Miami fans have a certain way of spelling Gators that we don't need to say on the show. But there's no love lost between the fan bases. Good luck selling hope. If you're Billy Napier or Mario Cristobal, to your fan base losing this game. And yes, Florida and Miami will play next year, but who knows when they will play after that. It's not like Florida State, where every year, every 365, you get a chance to get those bragging rights. You don't know when you will get the chance to get those bragging rights. And Billy Napier doesn't have the excuse that Mario will have of, well, we had to go on the road and it was a hostile environment. We had a bunch of transfers playing their first game for us. So there's almost a built-in excuse. Not that I don't know many Canes fans will want to hear it, but a built-in excuse for Miami being on the road that Billy Napier doesn't have playing that game at home. Looking at Florida's schedule, beat Miami, beat Samford. You have back-to-back first-year head coaches after that, first-year programs, and then UCF. I think UCF's a tougher game than people are giving it credit for.
Yes.
With KJ Jefferson, who is, I think, the actual quarterback that Gus Malzahn will make in EA College Football 25 this summer. To run his offense. And then you have to go to Tennessee, and Florida's 2-10 away from the swamp under Billy Napier. They have shown and given me no confidence that they can pick up their show, take it on the road, and run the same act. So you look at that schedule. Like I said last year, with last year's schedule, Andy, catch wins early because you might catch hands late. starting in November. I mean, it's just a brutal November, those 5 games from Georgia through Florida State. I agree with you. I think you have to be, I would say 5-1, 6-1, heading into Georgia. 6-1 heading into Georgia, you could be 6-6.
Beating Kentucky. It probably requires beating Kentucky, which Billy Napier has yet to do. There's a significant hill to climb right here, and we'll see. But I think you're right about the hope, and the Florida Miami thing, because they're not playing every year, because this is such a rare occurrence. Like, at least the winning fan base is going to be humble, and we'll handle it with grace and dignity and class.
Absolutely,
I'm sure.
Probably they'll teach classes on how to handle wins humbly.
Nick, I promise the next time I have you on, it'll be about something good.
Okay, thank you, Andy.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples On 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.